So we're in our series Road Trip, and no matter where you are in your faith journey, if you're just starting out, if you're thinking about it, if you've been following Christ for years and years, the reality is we all at times feel like we're on a road trip, and we're moving through life, and we're looking at what our journey is like. We're asking questions. We're asking ourselves, sometimes there's a season of life where we really focus on where is my life or where is your life heading? And sometimes others ask that question to us. And it's just kind of a theme that comes and has a little more focus or a little more weight from time to time. Now, last week we talked about the idea that most of us, as we're on this road trip, no matter who we are, we have children involved in our lives. If we're an aunt and uncle, maybe working with children, maybe a neighbor, maybe we're parents, grandparents, etc., etc., etc. There are seasons of life where it's just a little bit more apparent that there are kids in our life and how we interact with them, and all of that is a part of our road trip. And one of the questions that all of us from time to time have to answer at least once is, what are we going to do with this idea of Disney World? Are we taking the family or are we not? Is it on the radar? Is it something that's important to us? And last week as we dove into that, we really saw that that was code for asking this question. And the question was this: are we after making our kids happy or making our kids good? And how that all flows out. Now, if we're a Christ follower, we actually, instead of using the word good, we might use the word holy. Are we interested in making our kids happy or holy? What's the object? What are we trying to do? And we're not going to talk about all the details of holiness, but we talked about that last week. Eric already mentioned that you can find out that information online. You can also request a CD if you go out to guest services. They have that there, so you can think about what that really means, the difference between goodness and holiness. But this question just kind of, in a sense, hangs out there. This idea of what are we going to do with our kids? Are we on our way to Disneyland? Are we more concerned about holiness, happiness, goodness, those kinds of things? And as we invest in our kids, it doesn't really matter who you are. Most of us really want our kids to step into goodness. Even if we don't have a faith base, we want our kids to be good kids, good citizens. And we may not articulate it that way, but we're hoping they're leaning in that direction rather than that. But all of us have faced times that have been weighty for some of us, maybe not as weighty for others, but we've all faced times where they don't. They, in a sense, step away from goodness. They step away from holiness. And when we have that kind of situation going on in our lives, it just really, really rips our hearts out. It breaks our hearts. And it's across the board, no matter who we are. When our kids, in a sense, step away from that, it just really tears us up. And here's a couple that are really bothered because their son stepped away from goodness. You know, it's amazing how something as fun and silly as Star Wars can have some real poignant moments. Because some of us have been there. Some of us have had a child, a kid in our lives, whether they're our biological kid, that we've wanted to speak into their lives, and they've just taken steps away. In a sense, they've abandoned goodness, and it just rips at our heart. And even in a moment like this, we're watching that, and some of us, it's pretty raw. It's pretty raw. But the idea of Disneyland, the idea of holiness, happiness, goodness, still is a part of our heartbeat for that child, that individual in our life, no matter where they are. And it's interesting that even Princess Leia realized that Han Solo still had influence in his kid's life. You know, your uncle is a Jedi, and well, Luke's a Jedi. And Princess Leia says, no, but you're his father. And no matter where the kids that are significant to us in our lives go, we have to remember that as parents, as people that have an interest in that child's life, now an adult, wherever they may be, there still is some influence there. That influence may change. It may not have the same intensity, but you always have an influence in that child's life. They may seem to have stepped away, but you still have an influence. They may, in a sense, have gained everything in life. They may be very successful. They may be really having the world by the tail, if you will. But they've missed out on the important things. But you and I, as having an influence in their life, it still exists. It's still there. And it's important that we think it through, because if we don't think it through, if we don't think about the influence that we always have, we can accidentally, unintentionally, just waste it. Because we all still have it to some degree. Even if they've chosen the Disneyland route, even if they chose happiness over everything. I would like you to take a look at Mark chapter 8, verse 36, page 705, and that's in the Bible around you. If you don't happen to have your own personal copy of God's Word, feel free to take that as a gift from Seneca Community Church. Also, the YouVersion Bible is available online. It's a free app. That's a great thing to put on your electronic device. I'll also have the verses up on the screen. But Mark 8:36, in a sense, speaks to this idea of what happens when a person gains everything. And we think about what happens when my child, in a sense, life is going so well that it almost seems like they don't need a faith in their life, because they're making it, and they're making it well, and on some levels they even look like they're making it better than we are, and we have this faith. And Jesus articulates this. He talks about this. He says, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? What good is it for someone to get everything, to gain everything, and to forfeit their soul? Again, we look at that person that really seems to be making it, and they've stepped away from what we would say is goodness or holiness. And really it seems like they've stepped into a preoccupation with just being happy. And they're making it. You know, Han Solo and Princess Leia, their son was making it. He had risen to the top. He had power. He had everything. But every once in a while we can see that he really wasn't making it. Watch as we see how this starts. We don't know where the story's going, but in 6 or 8 weeks we will know what's happening. We know what happens to Han Solo. I won't give anything away. But this continues to be this theme. It's not too late. We still have some influence. And we need to make sure that we don't waste it. It's never too late to influence a kid, a child, an adult towards holiness, rather than just happiness, rather than just arriving. We still have that influence. We still have that. Again, that's why Jesus says, this whole idea, we have to think about how we can do this. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? And last week, and again, you can look at it online, but last week we talked about the difference between a proverb and a promise, or a principle and a promise. And we unfold that in part 3. But this whole thing, what are we doing with our influence? How do we? Are we really thinking through the difference of a Disneyland exit rather than a goodness exit or a holiness exit? Last week, again, we took a look at missed exits, and again, you can catch up with that. This week, we're going to jump into the skipped exits. What exits do we have to make sure that we actually skip? Last week, we missed them. This week, there are a couple that we can skip. And as we're trying to influence children, as we're trying to influence the kids in our lives, we have to ask ourselves, what are we about to skip? And when it comes to these ideas, we have to ask ourselves, are we putting too much weight into arriving in the greater schemes? For example, are we putting all our energy into our children to be, let's say, a sports star? And everything surrounds that. We want to make them happy, so it's just sports, 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 sports. And that's a great thing to a point. But are we looking at it, are we going to set that child up to arrive and say, wow, sports is in a sense my answer to life? Or even academics. Do we say, if you just have this and we just have them put all their energies into that? Valedictorian of their class, a hunter, a craftsman, a model, a performer, a student government star. We just organize their whole life around that idea because we're thinking, if they can just gain the world, but what we don't realize that there can be sometimes a downside to that. Do we look at them to this after-school job that creeps into anything related with faith community? And we just throw them into that. We throw them into that, get that job, and we realize that we don't really stop to think that they're missing out on a component of life. We want them to achieve it, that we want them to have good work ethic. And on one level, that's fantastic. An artist, a theological star, all these kinds of things. What are we doing with our kids? Because again, what Jesus says here is this idea about what good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul, yet don't have that connection with God. What good is that? So here's some exits that we need to skip so we don't get there, and then we're going to talk about some ideas, some concepts to bring us all back into that to see how we can really make sure we're trying to get our children that we're involved with leaning into holiness. Well, the first exit we need to really make sure that we skip is this. It's called the legalistic Christianity exit. We need to skip that one. We need to stay away from that. It's rules without heart. It's rules without heart relationship with Christ. It's you got to do all these things. And over the summer we had this series, Living Well with Freedom, and we danced around that and talked about that a little bit, about the whole idea of legalism. But it's this idea that we need to skip that exit. If we make it just about rules in our kids' lives, we're setting some things in motion in a few moments we'll talk about that just aren't good. Paul writes about this when he says, put all that pretentious, infantile religion behind you. Why do you let yourself be bullied by it? He's making the comparison right now that in the New Testament church, in the early church, as they transitioned from being real followers of the Jewish law and all the details that go with that, and they're seeing that Jesus didn't come to cancel the law but fulfill the law, and they're all working through all that ceremonial law. There's a group that want to hold them back to that. And he's saying, let it go. Don't be bullied by that. He says it this way, don't touch this, don't taste that, don't go near this. All those ideas, he's saying, stay away from that. Don't, in a sense, produce a legalistic Christ follower, a legalistic Christian as you're raising children, as you're pointing them in a direction. There's also another exit, which is almost the extreme opposite of that, lukewarm Christianity. And don't produce that. Don't produce it in such a way that those in your household, those that you have connection with, just see that Christianity really isn't the main issue in your life. It isn't the main thing. It's kind of like a side dish. Don't do that. Jesus, speaking to the church in Revelation, says this, I know your deeds. You're neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either or the other. Either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. The taste of us living that kind of life in the mouth of Jesus is not pleasant to him. You ever got something in your mouth that is spoiled a little bit? Go to my parents' house. They have like food in the refrigerator that's been like there for months, years, way back, and sometimes I go back there and I'm looking for something, and shame on you, Dave, for going in your parents' refrigerator, but hey, they're my parents, and I'm going in there and I'm looking for something. I can remember one time I took some cheese and didn't see the other side of it. It was blue. It wasn't supposed to be blue cheese, and I put some of that in my mouth, and I got it out as quickly as I could. It did not taste good. And so when you and I, who say we're Christ followers, live a lukewarm life, we're really not all the way in, we're kind of holding back, that's the way, in a sense, we taste to Jesus. He still loves us, still offers us grace. We don't earn our way to him, but it's that kind of bad taste. I don't stop liking cheese just because I got a bad piece of it. So we have to ask ourselves those kinds of questions. A little bit farther down in that passage, it's interesting. Here's a verse that sometimes is shared in moments where we're asking someone, would you say yes to Jesus? Someone who has no relationship with God at this point. And we quote this verse, but really, if you look at the context of this verse, where this verse is found, it's actually found with people who have already said yes to Jesus. This is a verse that people who know Jesus, who have asked him into our life, who are trying to follow God, but at a lukewarm level. And this is what Jesus says. He says, "Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me." Wow. So actually, I can be a Christ follower and have such a hard exterior that Jesus is knocking at the door of my heart, and I'm not listening to him. I'm not in real community with him. I'm lukewarm or I'm legalistic. I think this could apply to both of those situations. And he's out there knocking. And if you ever see the pictures of that depicted on stained glass, you'll notice that there's not a doorknob on the outside. Because the door has to be open from the inside. And that's one of the wonderful catch-22 things about our God, our Savior, is he doesn't force himself in. And some of us are in the inside, the door is shut, and we have the stereo of our life blasting so hard on purpose that we can't hear his knocks. It's a dangerous place to be. Life is going so crazy, and that goes back to that whole thing. What is it if a person gains the whole world and loses their soul? Sometimes we set kids up, sometimes we set ourselves up to have busy, loud, so we can't hear the little knocks on the door. And some of us, those of us in church world, doing the church thing, can turn up church so loud, be busy doing church stuff so much that we don't hear the knock on the door. Sometimes as a pastor, I can be so at it and so in motion that I don't hear him knocking at my door. But he says he wants to come in. He wants to have supper with us, have a meal with us, one of the most personal community kinds of events. And that's what he wants to be. So we need to skip these two exits. And for a lot of us, we get off the exit and then we need to get back on the highway and get back off as quick as we can. We make a course correction. The GPS needs to tell us, get back on the road. Get off that. Stay away from that legalistic exit. Stay away from that lukewarm exit. And I've showed you renditions of this before. It's not original with me. But this idea that rules without relationship produce rebellion. And I've added this idea in rigidness. When we have rules for our kids without relationship, it produces rebellion. Eventually we push back on that. Just think of maybe with a place you work. You hang out. You have connections with your boss. You have a relationship with the person that's leading your team. And you have that relationship, and they push you in some directions you don't want to go. But because you have a relationship with that boss, you kind of roll with it. You're a little more okay with it. Even when you don't understand it, you're okay with it to a point. See, the relationship carries the day. But when you don't, you're just totally irritated with that person when there's no relationship. And for us with our kids, we can actually they can comply while they're under our control. But as soon as they're out of our control, they're out of our control. And it just gets played out. And also, I would say, and again, there's no scientific fact for this, but I would say this is a 90%, 10% split. Say 90% of us are going to respond with rebellion. And then there's probably 10% of us that just become really rigid in our lifestyle. We adopt all those rules. And some of it may be because deep in our heart we've been trying to gain approval. We've tried to get approval with people in our lives. So if we follow the rules, they'll like us, no matter how crazy the rules are. And so we kind of transfer that in our relationship with God. We say, man, if I just follow these rules, then God will like me just a little bit more. And then that's not true. You see, it's with relationship. And you see that with Jesus and his disciples. He had a strong relationship with them. And so as Jesus is teaching them a way of lifestyle, a way of thinking, they don't boil it down to rules. It's fluid in their relationship. And so even when Jesus gives them things that are hard to swallow and stretches them, they still roll with it because they love Jesus. They have a relationship with him. They don't hold back. So again, when we're thinking about happiness over holiness, we don't want to get confused that holiness is a bunch of rules. Or it's loosey-goosey, let them figure it out totally on their own. And we kind of function that way. Well, the exit 2 take is this. Take this exit and hang on. It's not easy. And you take this exit and hang on, you use the word influence. Last week, Rachel Almerding, our children's ministry coordinator and director, and Danny and Michelle, our student ministries leaders, were up here, and they kept using this word orange, and the idea that the church comes alongside the family, and we influence together. But if you remember those specific details, the family still has significantly more influence than the church. But when there's a combination, when there's a complementing one another, it seems that influence that family has gets multiplied, amplified. And so that's the beauty of this kind of thing. I think of the things that my parents taught me and then the individuals in my life that reinforce those things. Again, my parents had so much more influence, so much more input into my life. But it was a sense, the sweetness of those other people pulling in the same direction that my parents were in kind of put me over the edge in some areas, so I was ready to follow. This influence is something, again, we need to think about. Some components to go along with that. First is this. Values will be embraced and guardrails will be scraped. Values will be embraced and guardrails will be scraped. Let me unpack that a little bit for you. This verse speaks to that a little bit. So I'm filling some blanks in there. But the student is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like the teacher. So we might even say the parent, the person investing in a student, in a child's life, the kid is not above the parent. But everyone who is fully trained will be like that parent, be like that investor. It's the idea that who you are, your values get rubbed off onto the children you work with, the other people. So sometimes we think, oh, wow, well, I'm distilling these values. But we have to realize that our values are picked up. But what's different is the guardrails, the boundaries in our life aren't picked up. It's not the same. So I give this value, and my value may say this, but where I stop, my child, the person I'm investing, goes in just a little farther. If we take a look at King David in the Older Testament, one moral failure that we're aware of. And then if we stop and look at his kids picked up the value that fidelity, that being faithful to your spouse is a big deal, but there are exceptions to that. And because that is the truth in their minds, that value got passed on. But how that value showed up as the guardrails got smashed through is, first of all, if you know the story of David's family, one of his sons raped one of his sisters. One of his sons caused a huge rebellion, and there was sexual escapades going on there. And then the son that becomes absolute king was just out of control in the area of intimacy. You see, David said, this is my value, but this is my boundary. And because he never spoke into that, his kids went so much farther. Sometimes when you and I realize we've communicated a value that is out of sync with who God is and how He would like us to function, I feel at the right time, in the right way, each one of us have to have a come to Jesus meeting with that child and say, you know, dad or mom or whoever blew it in this area. We didn't want to convey that value to you. So hear us now. Hear us now. That was out of sync. Because those kinds of things that we as parents, we as investors that are involved with those values, the kids kind of figure those things out. So if honesty is a big deal with you, and where you work, calling in sick is actually calling in sick when you're not sick. Now, some places we work, it's all holiday pay, it's all sick time, so it really doesn't matter. But if you work at a place where sick time is really supposed to be sick time, and you're going to Disney World or going whatever, and you call in, and the kids are even young, they pick up on that. So they learn value. When honesty involves me taking an extra day off because I got some important things to do, I can kind of fudge in that area. So then when they're older, and they say they're going to a football game, and go to a party, and they lied to you, and you say, I can't believe you lied to me. Where'd they pick that value up? You see, you sent a value, but your boundary was different. Boundary was different. We'll really get uncomfortable now. If you think belonging a part of a church family is important, and you occasionally for a brunch or family's over, and you just say, well, you know, the family's over, so we're not going to be a part of that. We're not going to that. And it might happen once a year, twice a year. The kids will pick up the value. Church is important unless there's this criteria. Now, you would never just say, I'm just going to sleep in today, you know, and skip church, because that's a guardrail, that's a boundary. You wouldn't go far. But if there's a family brunch or something, yes, I will. The kids are going to pick up that value. And so then when you're going, why aren't you going to church? Why don't you care about church? They may not say it this way, but they picked up that value. It happens over and over again. And this is hard stuff. I have to ask myself, what values do I send to my kids even now? I have to ask, what are my spending habits? What are my entertainment habits? When the kids, now that they're adults, even when they were late 18s, what do I watch and what do I say is okay? So if I watch something that's a little questionable, they have a value. Oh, if it's a little bit questionable, it's okay. And then when I hear what they're watching, and it's like way over here, I go, how can they watch that thing? And if they were honest with me and could articulate it, they'd say, well, that's the value passed on to me. What? I would never watch. Well, you watch something that's questionable, entertainment. You know, I like entertainment. I like movies. Obviously, I like Star Wars. You watch something that's questionable. So their guardrail is completely different. Their boundary is completely different than you. And then we ask ourselves, why are they behaving this way? Driving, I don't even want to think about that. If Dad goes 75, it doesn't get a ticket. Value is, there's some grace there. You can move a little higher than the speed limit. Then why isn't my kid going to go 90? Boundaries different, value is the same. This is real stuff. I mean, you really look at how you're leading your kids and the kids in your life. It's not to question every little decision. You could go back and listen to the Freedoms in Christ series, so you can see that play out. But you got to ask these questions. You got to be honest with yourselves. The values we send, our kids are picking those up all the time. And they know them even better than us, the values. If we say, if we're talking about other people, we never say anything nice, we're gossipy, but we're just a little gossipy. And then we're listening to our kids on the phone and going, wow, I can't believe they're saying that stuff. Where'd they get that value from? Some of it came from you. Some of it came from me. They pick those things up. Whew, yikes. Some things that I think can help with that is oversee are some of the values you want to talk about. If we're really concerned about faith, and if you're not a Christ follower, these really don't apply to you, but if you are, is we ought to be involving God in our daily conversations. They ought to see that. They ought to hear that. They ought to see that God's real in your life. If he really is real in your life, you don't manufacture this stuff. We ought to do that. Also, we see that we need to make, I would say, church a non-negotiable. I know some of you, we talked about this in the series. Reuben came up and talked about this, but I don't know. It's a value. I can almost guarantee that your kids will probably be less a part of a community of faith than you are. I just think that happens most of the time. And so if that's not a value you communicate to them, not that we have everything right by any means, but I've shared with you before, we went to some really weird churches when we were on vacation. I mean, really weird churches, because we wanted the kids to know that, especially Dad, who's a pastor who gets paid to go to church, even when he's not getting paid to go to church, still goes to church. And we joke about some of the churches we went to because, one, the pastor actually swore a couple times when he was speaking. And the girls were like, what? Did you hear that? These unusual churches. But we made it a priority that I wanted to send that message to kids because I wanted them to have that value. And this may sound really harsh, but I remember the first time Hannah had to work a night shift and she got off at 7 in the morning after working like 16 hours as a nurse. She called us because she felt guilty about not going to church at 9 o'clock. And because that value, she owned it. So, and we said, no, honey, you've worked all night. There's nothing wrong with you going home and sleeping. But that bothered her because that value was built into her. The value about driving, we need to work on that. But anyway, so it's not, I'm not, remember we talked last week? Parents, when it comes to their kids growing up, either take too much credit or take too much blame. Just enough said on that. So, but again, these are these values that we're trying to set. Also, show how seeking and serving God is fun. Make it attractive. I think Rachel might have talked a little bit about that. We want to make following Jesus, walking with Jesus, honestly, fun. There's no better way to live. It's great to be a Christian. It's not restrictive to be a Christian. It's great. It's the best way to live in relationship with God. And so, we got to go to church today, or we got to go serve at this, or, I know I shouldn't do this because I'm a Christian. No, it's great. Serve Him. Get to see God show up in your life. You're working, you're doing something, and something wow happens. Someone responds to faith, and you're like, wow, and this is fun, this is exciting. That's one of the reasons Danny and Michelle talked about one of the greatest ways to have a student in high school own their faith is to have them living it out through service. But then again, there's another value, isn't it? Whoops. If I never serve as a parent, as someone really trying to do anything, then why would my kids pick up that value as important? Because obviously it must not important. I mean, my parents went to church forever. They had a special seat, and they never did anything, so I pick up that value. I don't mean to be mean, but we're honest, right? We're being frank right now. They pick that up. They get that. So why would they ever serve? Because you never did. They picked that value up. Whew. Okay. Oh, this is an even worse one. Modeling a fitting respect for authority. There are rules we need to follow, even when we don't like them. Paul writes to Titus, he says this, remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready to do what is ever good. I don't know about you, but I have a spouse that kind of reminds me of some of these things. So, and this don't take this the wrong way, but because you may do this and it's no big deal, but every time I drive out the enter driveway here, my wife says, what kind of model are you setting? You're driving out, and I'm like, who cares? It's no big deal, but I am sending a message, so when she's around, I don't do that. No, I really try not to do that. Now you're going to catch me doing it, and you're going to be like texting, calling me, whatever. But she's right. Every time you drive around those, you know those two curves, fast curves up here on the way to Waterloo, just as you're getting out of town? Yeah, my Q5 can take those like at 62 miles an hour, really nice. And he's like, what do you think? I said, this car was made for doing it this fast. No. Who do you think you are? Are you above that? You know, what's going on? But our kids pick that up. Every time someone in authority says something that you don't like, are you mouthy about it? Because they will pick that up. And actually, someday they'll be that way to you. And then when you don't understand why they're that way, it's because you were that way. And let's be real. Scripture over and over and over again. It's not saying when something is wrong, when something is sinful, but a lot of these things are preferences. A lot of these things are preferences. So if the person God's put in charge as a leader, and there's verses we can look at, and it's not outside of those areas, then we need to follow with a smile. Hebrews speaks about this. Have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. It's interesting. Your leaders, especially in church settings, have to give an account. And some of us take delight in it. Oh, they'll get it someday when they have to face Jesus. Well, someday you may get it too because of the way you responded to them. Do this so their work will be a joy, not a burden. For that would be of no benefit to you. You want to free your leaders up. Again, not that they're doing crazy things, not that they're doing sinful things. This isn't a permission to be sloppy and all this kind of stuff. But you want to be responsive to them. I like the way Eugene Peterson translates, be responsive to your pastoral leadership, or we could say your leaders. Listen to their counsel. They're alert to the conditions of your lives and work under the strict supervision of God. Contribute to the joy of their leadership, not its drudgery. Why would you want to make things harder for them? Enough said with that. Let's go to something more fun. Resist a Christ or a kid-centered marriage. If you want to be on the road, if you want to see your kids flourish, if you want to see them invest in holiness and goodness, if you want to take this exit, resist being a kid-centered marriage. You know, it's so important how you respond. Are you in love with the person you married? Or are you just roommates? And what are you going to do about that? I ought to be in love. I'll tell you, this happened, starting point. This Thursday night, I'm doing the lesson. Andy Stanley's on the video screen, and Andy Stanley's pretty captivating. But I looked over, and there's my wife. Wow, she just looked so good to me. And I'm kind of looking back and forth and kind of thing. And we have this way of signaling each other. Like nobody knows that I'm thinking of you and I love you. And I must have done that 4 or 5 times when Andy Stanley's up there talking, and nobody in that room knew that was going on. Because I'm captivated by my wife. Now, she has to work hard to be captivated by me. I said to her this week, I said, I love the way you love me. And that's the way marriage should be. So our kids should see that. I heard one guy talking about, he said he hoped he was never on a boat with his parents, and they only had 2 life jackets, and it was going down. Because the kids said, we weren't sure we were going to get the life jacket. We thought mom and dad would get it because they were so in love with each other. Are you a kid-centered? And it's not that you don't invest in your kids' lives. It doesn't mean you don't do all these things. But they ought to know. They ought to know that's the center of your life. Now, there's some situations where the marriage is in a bad place. I'm not talking about those extremes. I'm talking about in regular living. Resist a kid-centered marriage. Lovely as an angel, beautiful as a rose. Don't ever quit taking delight in her body. Never take her love for granted. I don't have to explain that. You get that. Do you love your spouse? Do you love your spouse? And earlier I said, again, this doesn't mean you don't engage in the life of your kids. Jesus came to us. Theological word for that, incarnation. He came to us. So yes, we need to be involved with our kids. We need to, yes, a lot of energy is always going to be going there. But don't lose your first love. In theory, that's why you now have kids, because you loved your spouse. Don't lose that. Remember time and time again telling the girls when they would be wanting something and kind of trying to pit Cindy and I against each other a little bit and like mom's being unreasonable or whatever, I go, listen to me. You cross your mom and you've crossed me. I love your mom more than I love you. I love you, but I love your mom more. I'm going to be with her when you're out the door. And even today, this doesn't mean, a couple weekends ago we did go see Mariah because we're empty nesters now. Today we're going up to see the girls for supper. We're taking them out to supper. That's even more expensive than having them in the house, but we're taking them out. So it doesn't mean you ignore your kids, but you certainly are engaged with your spouse. Also, very quickly, pick your battles carefully. Pick your battles carefully. I have to be very careful about this. I like order in my life. I like order in the house. I like neat bedrooms. I like stuff picked up off the floor. I like an empty sink, all those kinds of things. I'm one of those crazy guys. I'd rather have less and have that all. And there are some of those things where I needed to pick my battles. There are some of the things where it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter when my kids don't make their bed. Now if they're living with me at 32 and their room is still a mess, that's one thing. But someday they're going to be on. It really doesn't matter if they finish all their vegetables. I remember with Mariah, she this is now really terrible. She didn't really like milk, and for a while we'd be like, drink your milk, drink your milk, drink your milk, drink your milk. Later on today, I don't know if this was the case back then when she was little, she's kind of allergic to milk. Drink this poison, it's going to make you grow, and she's making her sick. I don't know. So you just never know, but really it didn't matter. It didn't matter. Pick your battles. Pick your battles wisely. Why? Parents, don't come down too hard on your children, or you'll crush their spirits. The kid who's always asking why is a good thing, because hopefully when they're 25, they'll ask why. A baby who keeps to themselves, doesn't cry, sleeps all night is wonderful. We love that. But when they're 25, we don't love that. We want them engaged. So make sure when you're thinking about the road trip and you're thinking about being involved in kids' life, you're not thinking about the way I want them to be at 10. It's the way they are when they're 25 and 30 and 35. So parent for that kid, not a 10 or 12-year-old kid. A lot of us are going to have kids, and then when they get out in the world, they're never going to resist anything. They're never going to say, hey, this isn't right. They're done thinking. Grow thinking kids that love Jesus and engage in their faith. Because I'm going to tell you, you can love Jesus, engage in your faith, be a super great Christ follower, and be a thinking person, not a robot. That's some of our problem. We're producing robots, not thinking people that can interact with the world they live in. And that's then we get what we get. So be careful about that. Be intentional. Think it through. Slow down enough. Because the reality is this: accidental Christian homes become accidents. Accidental Christian homes, unthinking, unaware, haphazard, whatever you want to call it, unintentional Christian homes become accidents. Would you pray with me? Oh, Father, as we talk about these and think about these things, I know when I was preparing this week, all kinds of messes that I created came to my mind. What did I do? Why did I do that? And Lord, there may be some things where there are times where I need to get those things straightened out with my kids. But Lord, I would ask that you would help us to really understand that we do have influence in our kids' lives. We don't have control in our kids' lives. We have influence in our lives. Help us learn how to leverage that with clear thinking, with wisdom, with knowledge. Help us not be accidental. Help it not be an accident the way our kids turn out one way or the other. Help our influence to really be in there. And yes, it's ultimately up to their decisions. But help us to think that through. Help me to think that through. Help Cindy and I and my friends here to continue to think, how do we influence? How do we parent as our kids grow? How do we do it when they're 25? How do we do it when they're 35? How do we do it when they're 50? How do we do that? Help us not be flip about it. Help us not to be accidental about it. Help us be very intentional. We are thankful that we don't do this alone, that you're right there with us. You actually love our kids more than we love our kids. You want the best for them more than we want the best for them. And we ask that you would help us to be able to partner with you, that we wouldn't be that legalistic Christ follower, we wouldn't be that lukewarm Christ follower, that our relationship with you would be such a way that as we're interacting with the world around us, especially the children in our lives, we're pointing them in the right direction. We ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.